When my when my daughter-in-law Thessaly told me I wasn't family and had no say in her home, I let her believe she was in control. But when she tried to ban me from seeing my own grandchildren in the house I'd owned for 30 years, I reminded her exactly whose name was on the deed. And by the end, she was the one begging to stay. My name is Cordelia, and for the past 3 years, I've been living a nightmare in my own home. When my son Castor married Thessaly, I thought I was gaining a daughter. Instead, I gained a tyrant who slowly but systematically pushed me out of the life I'd built. It started small, as these things always do. Thessaly would rearrange my furniture when I wasn't looking, claiming she was updating the space. She'd throw away my belongings, saying they were cluttering up the house. When I protested, Castor would take her side with that apologetic smile. "Mom, you know how important it is for newlyweds to make their own space. Their own space. In my house. The house I'd worked 3 jobs to pay off after my husband died 15 years ago. But I held my tongue because I loved my son, and I wanted him to be happy. I told myself that sharing my 4-bedroom home with them was the right thing to do. They were saving money, and I got to be close to my grandchildren, 6-year-old Phoenix and 4-year-old Sage. The children were the only bright spots in this increasingly dark situation. Phoenix, with his curious eyes and endless questions about everything. Sage, who would sneak into my room for bedtime stories when her parents thought she was asleep. They called me Nana Delia, and their laughter was the only thing that made living in my own home bearable. Because that's what it had become, barely bearable. Thessaly had gradually taken over every inch of my house. The kitchen was her domain. The living room had to be decorated to her standards. Even my own bedroom wasn't safe from her opinions about how I should organize my personal belongings. The worst part was watching her manipulate Castor. My son, who used to call me every day before he married her, now barely spoke to me unless she approved the conversation. He'd become a stranger, parroting her complaints about how I was set in my ways and resistant to change. But I kept quiet, thinking that if I just gave them enough space, enough time, things would improve. I was so wrong. The breaking point came on Phoenix's 7th birthday. I had been planning his party for weeks, coordinating with his school friends' parents, ordering his favorite superhero decorations, and preparing to make his requested chocolate cake with rainbow sprinkles, a tradition we'd started when he turned 4. That morning, I was in the kitchen gathering ingredients when Thessaly stormed in, her face twisted with irritation. "Cordelia, we need to talk," she announced, using that tone she reserved for what she considered my most egregious offenses. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked, though I'd learned to brace myself for these conversations. "I've decided to move Phoenix's party to the community center downtown. This house is too small for all the kids, and frankly, I don't want them running around breaking things." My heart sank. "But Thessaly, Phoenix specifically asked to have it here. He wants to show his friends his room, and we always do his birthday cake in the dining room where what? Where you can hover over everything and make everyone uncomfortable with your old-fashioned ideas?" She crossed her arms, her voice getting sharper. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Cordelia. You act like this is your house, like you have some special say in family decisions." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Thessaly, this is my house. My name is on the deed." Her laugh was bitter and cruel. "Your house? Really? When's the last time you contributed anything meaningful here? Castor pays all the utilities, all the grocery bills, all the maintenance costs. You just live here like some kind of tenant." The word hit me like a slap. Tenant. In my own home. "And another thing," she continued, emboldened by my silence. "I've been thinking that it might be better if you found somewhere else to live. Castor and I need space to raise our family properly, without constant interference from someone who isn't really family anyway." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Not family. After 3 years of biting my tongue, of watching her systematically erase me from my own life, she had finally said what I'd suspected she'd been thinking all along. In that moment, looking at her smug, satisfied expression, I realized that all my patience and accommodation had been perceived as weakness. and I was done being weak. For a moment, I just stared at Thessaly, letting her words sink in completely. Not family, not my house. The audacity was breathtaking, but what struck me most was how confident she seemed, how certain she was that I would just accept this latest humiliation. "Thessaly," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think you've forgotten something very important." Her eyebrow arched in that condescending way I'd grown to hate. "Oh? And what's that?" "This house, every brick, every floorboard, every light fixture, belongs to me. I bought it with my late husband 28 years ago. I've paid every mortgage payment, every tax bill, every repair cost for 15 years since he died. Castor's name isn't on any document related to this property." I watched her confident expression falter slightly, but she recovered quickly. "That's just technicalities, Cordelia. This is Castor's home now, which makes it mine too." "No," I said, the word coming out harder than I intended. "It makes you a guest in my home, a guest who has apparently forgotten her manners." Thessaly's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me like that? Castor will hear about this." "Good," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Because there are going to be some changes around here, and he needs to understand them too." She stormed out of the kitchen, her heels clicking angrily against the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 5 years ago. Within minutes, I could hear her on the phone with Castor, her voice shrill with indignation as she recounted our conversation, no doubt with her own creative embellishments. When Castor came home that evening, his face was set in the disappointed expression I'd seen too often lately. "Mom, Thessaly told me about your conversation today. Don't you think you were a little harsh?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, worked 3 jobs to put through college, supported through his struggles and celebrated through his successes, and felt something inside me harden. "Castor, do you know what your wife said to me today? She told me I'm not family. In my own home, she told me I should find somewhere else to live because I'm not really family." His face went pale, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised. But then Thessaly appeared beside him, her hand possessively on his arm. "I never said that exactly," she said smoothly. "I just suggested that maybe it would be better for everyone if we had more space." The lie was so blatant, so confident, that I realized this was just the beginning. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my bedroom, the one room Thessaly hadn't yet completely invaded, and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a reckoning. I wrote down every way she had undermined me, every casual cruelty, every time she had made decisions about my home without consulting me. The list was 3 pages long. The next morning, I was waiting in the kitchen when they came down for breakfast. Castor looked uncomfortable, clearly hoping the previous day's confrontation would just blow over. Thessaly, on the other hand, seemed to have interpreted my silence as surrender. "Cordelia," she said with fake sweetness, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, and you're right. We should all be more grateful for your hospitality. That's why I've decided to take over more of the household management. You've been working so hard for so long. It's time you relaxed a little." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I smiled pleasantly. "Actually, Thessaly, I've been doing some thinking too, and I've decided you're absolutely right about one thing. There do need to be some changes around here." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared the night before. "Since you feel that Castor's financial contributions give you decision-making authority in this house, I thought you should see exactly what those contributions amount to." I spread out papers on the kitchen table. Utility bills, property tax statements, insurance documents, maintenance receipts. Castor pays about $800 a month in utilities and groceries. The monthly property tax on this house is $1,200. Insurance is $300. That's not including maintenance, repairs, or the fact that comparable rental properties in this neighborhood go for $3,500 a month. Thessaly's face was already changing as she processed the numbers, but I wasn't finished. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice pleasant but firm. From now on, if you want to make decisions about how this house is run, you'll need to pay actual rent. Fair market value, $3,500 a month. Otherwise, you're guests in my home, and guests don't redecorate, reorganize, or make demands of their hosts. Castor's mouth fell open. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Your wife made it very clear that she views my ownership of this house as irrelevant. So let's make it relevant. You have 3 options. Pay rent and have equal say, continue as you are and respect that this is my home, or find your own place. Thessaly was sputtering now. This is ridiculous. You can't just change everything overnight. I smiled at her. Actually, I can. It's my house. The effect of my ultimatum was immediate and dramatic. Thessaly, who had been so confident in her position just days before, was suddenly scrambling to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from her. She tried everything. First came the tears, sobbing to Castor about how unreasonable and vindictive I was being. When that didn't work, she switched to anger, accusing me of trying to destroy their family. When Castor remained torn and uncertain, she tried manipulation, suggesting that my behavior was a sign of mental decline and that maybe I needed professional help. But the most telling change was in how she moved through the house. Gone was the entitled swagger, the casual assumption that everything was hers to control. Now she hesitated before rearranging anything, looked over her shoulder when making decisions about meals or household routines. The children, bless them, noticed the shift immediately. Phoenix asked me one evening, "Nana Delia, why is Mommy so angry all the time now?" "Sometimes adults have disagreements, sweetheart," I told him, brushing his dark hair back from his forehead. "But it doesn't change how much we all love you." Sage, wise beyond her 4 years, simply climbed into my lap and whispered, "I like it better when you're in charge, Nana. You make better cookies." Meanwhile, Castor was caught in the middle, and it was painful to watch. The man I'd raised to be decisive and principled was now paralyzed by conflicting loyalties. He would start conversations with me, then stop mid-sentence when Thessaly appeared. He agreed with her complaints about my unreasonable demands, but couldn't bring himself to actually challenge me directly. The breaking point came when Thessaly overplayed her hand. Unable to accept that her authority in the house was contingent on my goodwill, she decided to test my resolve. I came home from grocery shopping to find she had rearranged my living room completely, moving furniture I'd specifically asked her not to touch, taking down family photos that had hung in the same spots for years, and replacing them with her own decorative choices. But it wasn't just the furniture. She had also invited her sister Persephone over for what she loudly proclaimed was a family meeting about my increasingly erratic behavior. I stood in the doorway of my own living room, looking at these 2 women sitting on my relocated furniture in my rearranged space, planning to tell me how I should behave in my own home. And I realized that Thessaly had just handed me the perfect opportunity to show her exactly what ownership meant. I set my grocery bags down carefully and smiled at my unexpected guests. "Thessaly, Persephone, what a surprise. I wasn't expecting company today." Persephone, who shared her sister's sense of entitlement but lacked her subtle manipulation skills, jumped right in. "Cordelia, we need to have a serious talk. Thessaly has been telling me about the unreasonable demands you've been making, and frankly, we're concerned about your mental state." "My mental state?" I asked pleasantly, taking a seat in what used to be my favorite chair before it had been moved to the opposite corner of the room. "Yes," Thessaly said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "The sudden personality change, the hostile behavior toward family, the irrational financial demands, these can all be signs of cognitive decline in older women." I had to admire the strategy, even as it infuriated me. Paint me as mentally unstable, and suddenly every reasonable boundary I set could be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused old woman. "How thoughtful of you both to be concerned," I said. "But I'm curious, Thessaly, when you rearranged my living room today without permission, Was that an example of the respectful behavior I should expect from family? Her face flushed. I was just trying to create a more open space for our conversation. In my house, I interrupted gently, using my furniture, after I specifically asked you not to move these pieces. Persephone leaned forward aggressively. See, this is exactly what we're talking about. This obsession with ownership. This need to control every little detail. It's not healthy, Cordelia. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, making sure they could see what I was doing. Since you both seem so concerned about my mental health, I want to make sure we have a clear record of this conversation. For my doctor, you understand. The effect was immediate. Both women's postures changed, their voices becoming more measured. Now, I continued, let me make sure I understand your position. You believe that because I want to maintain authority over my own property that I own outright, property that I've maintained for decades, this indicates mental illness? That's not what we're saying, Thessaly backtracked quickly. Then what are you saying? Because what I heard was my daughter-in-law and her sister suggesting that my desire to have final say in my own home is somehow unreasonable. I stood up, still holding my phone. Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to leave my house now. Thessaly, you can come back when you're ready to apologize and acknowledge that this is my home. Until then, you're not welcome here. Persephone stood up angrily. You can't just kick out your own family. I smiled at her. Watch me. The next 3 days were the most peaceful I'd experienced in my own home since Castor and Thessaly had moved in 3 years ago. With Thessaly staying at her sister's house, the house felt like mine again. I rearranged the living room back to the way I liked it, cooked meals that I enjoyed, and most importantly, spent uninterrupted time with Phoenix and Sage. Castor was miserable, caught between his wife's demands that he stand up to his mother and his growing realization that maybe, just maybe, I had valid points. He tried to negotiate, suggesting compromises that would let Thessaly save face while giving me some of what I wanted. But I was done compromising. 3 years of accommodation had taught me that giving an inch to Thessaly meant losing a mile. Mom, Castor pleaded on the third evening, she's my wife. I can't just abandon her. I'm not asking you to abandon her, I replied calmly. I'm asking you to remember that before she was your wife, I was your mother, and this was my home long before it was yours. The children were the hardest part. Phoenix kept asking where Mommy was, and Sage cried herself to sleep the first night. But by the third day, even they seemed to be adjusting to the calmer atmosphere. That's when Thessaly made her next move. She showed up at my front door with a locksmith. What exactly do you think you're doing? I asked, blocking the entrance. Castor called me, she said smugly. He realized that you've been emotionally manipulating him, and he's asked me to come home. Since this is our family home, I'm having the locks changed for security purposes. The locksmith, an older man who looked uncomfortable with the situation, cleared his throat. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some documentation that you have the right to change these locks. Thessaly's confidence faltered slightly. My husband lives here. This is his home. But who owns the property? The locksmith asked. I smiled and pulled out my wallet, extracting my driver's license with this address, followed by my property deed. That would be me. The locksmith looked at Thessaly expectantly. When she couldn't produce any legal documentation giving her the right to change the locks, he packed up his tools. Sorry, ma'am. Can't help you without proper authorization from the property owner. As he drove away, Thessaly turned to me, her mask of composed manipulation finally slipping completely. This isn't over, Cordelia. I'll make sure Castor chooses between us, and when he chooses me, you'll lose everything that matters. I looked at this woman who had spent 3 years trying to erase me from my own life, and I felt something like pity. Thessaly, I said quietly, you never understood the most important thing. Castor doesn't get to choose who owns this house, and neither do you. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Thessaly's carefully constructed world begin to unravel. Without the foundation of her assumed authority in her home, she struggled to maintain control over any aspect of the situation. First, she tried to convince Castor to rent an apartment, but the reality of their finances hit hard. Between student loans, car payments, and credit card debt, they had been living paycheck to paycheck even while staying in my house rent-free. A $3,500 apartment was completely out of reach, and cheaper options meant leaving the school district where Phoenix had finally made friends. Then she attempted to rally family support, calling my sister Elena and my brother Marcus to complain about my unreasonable behavior. But Thessaly had overplayed her hand there too. Elena, who had watched me struggle as a single mother for 15 years, was not sympathetic to a woman complaining about free housing. Marcus, ever practical, simply asked, "Why doesn't she just apologize and follow Cordelia's house rules?" The final blow to her strategy came when she tried to use the children as leverage. She announced to Castor that she was uncomfortable with Phoenix and Sage staying in a house where they might witness unstable behavior from their grandmother. That backfired spectacularly. Phoenix, who had been carefully listening to adult conversations with the wisdom of a 7-year-old, chose that moment to speak up. "Mommy, why are you mad at Nana Delia? She's not mean like you said. She makes us breakfast and helps with homework and doesn't yell at Daddy." Sage, not to be outdone, added, "I want to stay with Nana. She reads better stories." Castor's face went through a series of expressions as he processed his children's words. For the first time since this all began, he was seeing the situation through their eyes instead of through Thessaly's filter. Meanwhile, staying at Persephone's house was taking its toll on Thessaly. Persephone had her own family, her own routines, and her own opinions about how long house guests should stay. After 2 weeks of sleeping on a couch and living out of suitcases, even Thessaly's staunchest ally was dropping hints about finding more permanent arrangements. I learned all this through Castor, who was growing more haggard and conflicted each day. He would come home from work, spend time with the children, and then sit in the kitchen with me, looking lost. "She wants me to choose," he finally admitted one evening. "She says if I don't make you apologize and take back your demands, she'll file for divorce and take the kids." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "And what do you want, Castor?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want my family together, all of us, in this house where the kids are happy and settled." He looked up at me with tired eyes. "But I don't know how to make that happen anymore." That's when I knew it was time for the final lesson. I called Thessaly and asked her to come over for a conversation. Not a negotiation, not a family meeting, just the two of us, talking honestly for perhaps the first time since she'd entered my family. She arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably despite her temporary living situation, her armor of perfect makeup and carefully styled hair fully in place. But I could see the cracks underneath, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted around the living room that I had restored to my preferred arrangement. "Thessaly," I began, gesturing for her to sit. "I want you to tell me something honestly. What did you think was going to happen here?" She straightened her shoulders, defaulting to her usual defensive posture. "I thought you would act like a reasonable adult and stop trying to control every aspect of our lives." "No," I said gently. "I mean, what did you think was going to happen when you told me I wasn't family and should move out of my own house?" For the first time since I'd known her, Thessaly seemed genuinely caught off guard by a direct question. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I thought you would realize that it was time, that Castor and I needed space to build our own life. In my house." "It doesn't feel like your house," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "It feels like you're this presence hanging over everything we do. Every decision we make, every change we want to implement, we have to consider what Cordelia will think. It's suffocating." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. For the first time, I was seeing something like honesty from her, and it was revealing. "So your solution was to push me out entirely?" "My solution was to create some boundaries," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "By telling me I wasn't family, by having your sister come here to question my mental health, by trying to change the locks on my own front door." Each point hit like a physical blow, and I watched her perfect composure crumble a little more with each one. I never meant... She started, then stopped. What? You never meant what? I never meant for it to go this far. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. I just wanted to feel like this was my home too. I looked at this woman, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't expected. Underneath all the manipulation and entitlement, there was fear. Fear of being displaced. Fear of not measuring up. Fear of losing the life she thought she was building. Thessaly, I said softly, did you ever consider just talking to me about that? The moment of honesty between us might have led somewhere productive, but Thessaly couldn't sustain it. As soon as she realized she'd shown vulnerability, she snapped back into attack mode. Don't turn this around on me, she said, her voice rising. You're the one who created this situation with your petty power games and your threats. I'm not going to sit here and let you psychoanalyze me in my own home. This is not your home, I said quietly. It will be, she shot back, standing up abruptly. When you're dead, this house will go to Castor, and then it will really be mine. So maybe I should just wait you out. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Get out, I said. What? Get out of my house, right now. You can't just... I can and I am. I stood up, my voice remaining calm despite the fury building inside me. You just told me you're waiting for me to die so you can inherit my home. You're not welcome here anymore. Not you, and not Castor if he chooses to stay with someone who wishes his mother dead. Thessaly's face went white as she realized what she'd said. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. And now I know exactly who you are. She tried to backtrack, to explain, to manipulate her way out of the hole she'd dug, but I was done listening. I walked to the front door and held it open. Get out. After she left, I sat in my quiet house and made a decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer. Harold, I need to make some changes to my will. The next morning, I had all the locks changed by a locksmith I hired with my money for my house. When Castor came home from work, he found his key no longer worked. I opened the door to find him standing there with Phoenix and Sage, both children looking confused and tired. Mom, what's going on? Your wife told me yesterday that she's waiting for me to die so she can inherit this house. I've decided that's not going to happen. I handed him a copy of my revised will. The house now goes to Phoenix and Sage in a trust that Thessaly can never touch. She'll never own this property no matter what happens to me. Castor's face went through a series of emotions as he processed this information. Mom, she didn't mean... She meant exactly what she said, and now she has to live with the consequences. Behind him, I could see Thessaly getting out of her car, her face set with determination for what was clearly going to be another confrontation. But this time, I was ready for her. Thessaly stormed up the front walkway like a woman possessed, her earlier vulnerability completely replaced by righteous fury. Cordelia, we need to talk right now. Actually, I said, still standing in my doorway, we don't. You're trespassing on my property. Trespassing? My children live here. Your children are welcome here anytime. You are not. Castor stepped between us, looking haggard. Mom, please, we're family. We can work this out. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised with so much love and hope, and felt my heart break a little. Castor, your wife told me yesterday that she's waiting for me to die so she can inherit my house. Is that the kind of family you want to be part of? His face went pale. She said what? Thessaly's composure cracked. I was angry. People say things when they're angry. Do they? I asked. Because I've been angry plenty of times in my life and I've never wished death on anyone. Phoenix tugged on my sleeve. Nana Delia, why is everyone yelling? I knelt down to his level, my voice gentle. Sometimes adults have very serious disagreements, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, you and Sage will always be welcome in Nana's house. What about Mommy and Daddy? I looked up at Thessaly, who was clearly realizing that her earlier words had consequences she hadn't anticipated. That depends on whether they can remember how to be respectful guests. Guests? Thessaly's voice cracked. We're not guests, we're family. Family doesn't wish death on each other, I replied calmly. Castor ran his hands through his hair, looking lost. What do you want us to do, Mom? Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. I offered you reasonable terms for living in my house, and your wife chose to reject them. She chose to insult me, manipulate me, and ultimately wish for my death. These are the consequences of those choices. I stood up and looked directly at Thessaly. You spent 3 years trying to push me out of my own home. You succeeded in pushing yourself out instead. Thessaly's face cycled through emotions: anger, disbelief, calculation, and finally, something that looked like panic. You can't do this. The children need stability. The children have stability, with me, in this house that will someday be theirs. What they don't need is to grow up watching their mother treat their grandmother with contempt. I'll apologize, she said suddenly. I'll apologize for what I said. I shook my head. It's too late for apologies, Thessaly. You showed me who you really are. As I prepared to close the door, I heard her voice, smaller now, almost pleading. Please, we have nowhere else to go. I paused, looking at this woman who had made my life miserable for 3 years, and felt no satisfaction in her desperation, only a deep, weary sadness. You should have thought of that, I said quietly, before you told me you were waiting for me to die. 6 months have passed since that final confrontation, and my life has settled into a rhythm I never expected, but have come to cherish deeply. Castor and Thessaly found a small apartment across town, not in the best school district, not with the space they wanted, but what their budget could actually handle. The reality check was harsh but necessary. Without the cushion of free housing in my home, they've had to face the true cost of their lifestyle and make some difficult adjustments. The most beautiful part is that Phoenix and Sage spend every weekend with me, plus Wednesday afternoons after school. Court-mandated visitation wasn't necessary. Castor knew better than to try to keep the children from me, especially after Thessaly's "waiting for you to die" comment became family legend. The children have flourished in this new arrangement. Phoenix, now 7, tells me he likes having 2 homes and enjoys showing his friends around my house when they come over. Sage, who just turned 5, has claimed my guest bedroom as her room and has decorated it with drawings and craft projects. Their laughter fills these halls again, the way it should. Castor and I have slowly rebuilt our relationship. It took time for him to fully process how thoroughly he'd been manipulated, how completely he'd lost sight of the woman who raised him. Our conversations now are honest in a way they haven't been since before his marriage. He's apologized repeatedly for choosing Thessaly's narrative over his own observations. As for Thessaly herself, I rarely see her anymore. When she does come to pick up or drop off the children, she stays in her car. The entitled, demanding woman who once rearranged my furniture without permission now can't make eye contact with me. I hear through Castor that she's struggling. The apartment is cramped, money is tight, and without the buffer of my house and my patience, she's had to confront some hard truths about herself. Persephone, her sister, has grown tired of the constant drama and complaints. Last week, Phoenix asked me something that made me smile. "Nana Delia, do you think Mommy learned her lesson?" "What do you think, sweetheart?" He considered this seriously, the way 7-year-olds do when pondering adult mysteries. "I think she learned that saying mean things has consequences. From the mouths of babes, the house feels like mine again, not because I've banished everyone from it, but because the people who remain here understand respect. When the children visit, they know to ask before moving things, to clean up after themselves, to treat this space with care. It's not about control, it's about mutual respect. Sometimes I think about Thessaly's words, 'It will be mine when you're dead.' She was wrong about that. This house will never be hers. But more importantly, she was wrong about something else. She thought ownership was about possession, about power over others. True ownership, I've learned, is about creating a space where the people you love feel safe, respected, and valued. And that's something you can't inherit, steal, or manipulate your way into. That's something you have to